Joe Biden apparently is not content to simply just sail off into the sunset and be remembered as one of the worst presidents ever. Instead, he has to tarnish his whole reputation, what little remains of it, and say, hey, guess what? I probably would have beaten Donald Trump if I would have stayed in the race and not allowed Kamala to come in and just foul everything up. Of course, the problem with this is the numbers just simply don't add up. If we look over here at the 538, the national polling average at the end of the presidential race, Kamala Harris was polling at 48% and Donald Trump was at 46.8%. Now, as we all know, Donald Trump ended up winning the popular vote 49.9% to Kamala Harris's 48.4%. So in other words, the aggregates were actually almost correct on Kamala Harris's numbers. They were just completely wrong on Donald Trump's numbers. So basically what we have is a 3% swing from the 538's averages to reality, okay? And of course, if we look back at Joe Biden's last numbers in the last poll, we had Donald Trump beating him 46.6 to Biden's 43.3. Now, if we simply add on that 3% to Donald Trump, he'd be at around that same 49.9%. Of course, that 3% has to come from somewhere, so it's completely possible there could have been a 53% to 40% victory over Joe Biden. But of course, this is all complete and total speculation. We do, however, have a complete reality that we are currently living in, where yes, Kamala Harris was a terrible candidate, but it looks like she was at least better than Joe Biden, who was sinking and sinking fast, okay? But even the left can't deny the fact that Joe Biden is basically spewing a bunch of garbage here, as we're going to see from David Pakman and the Young Turks. So before we get to these clips, please like and comment on this video so we can break through the algorithms. Here we go.
Joe Biden, according to an exclusive new report from the Washington Post, regrets dropping out of the race and believes that he would have defeated Donald Trump. What is going on here? This is very, very interesting. I don't think Biden could have won if he stayed in the race. And if you ask me, what do I have to point to as far as that goes? It's the campaign that Biden was running and public opinion up until the time that Kamala Harris took over. Kamala Harris lost, and I believe Biden would have lost. Democrats were flunking on the economic messaging, on immigration messaging, and on crime messaging. That's not unique to Kamala Harris. That was happening under Biden, even though the economy was good. By all traditional metrics, people didn't believe it, and the economic messaging wasn't convincing people. People weren't hearing what they believed they needed to hear on crime, even though crime has been declining. Remember, we're operating in a world of perception. Yes, the economic indicators were good. Yes, crime was declining. But people did not believe that the way the Biden administration was talking about it, and ultimately the Harris campaign, they didn't believe that it communicated a seriousness that they needed to hear. That was the same with Biden as with Harris. So I don't think if Biden stays in, it solves that issue. The polling scenario, the polling for Harris when she took over improved from where Biden was when he dropped out. It then came back to earth a little bit. But on election day, Harris's polling was as good as was Biden's when he dropped out. So there's also no mathematical or polling case to be made that the staying in of Biden would have led to a Biden win. The pendulum swing that we have in the United States was facing down Biden just like it faced down Kamala Harris. Trump's economic message, while vapid and based on things Trump doesn't understand and can't possibly do, it was hitting home to enough voters that they said, let's give Trump a shot. The point I'm trying to make is, I understand seeing how Harris was defeated, being Joe Biden and saying, damn, maybe I should have stayed in, maybe I would have had a shot. I understand thinking that. My interpretation is both Biden and Harris would have lost.
So this, of course, is left-winger David Pakman, and he actually has some good points there, but he gets the basic facts completely and totally wrong, right? The American people, it was just the perception of the border, the perception of the economy, the perception of crime. That was the reason that Joe Biden lost, right? It wasn't the actual reality, right? By all metrics, the economy was improving. Yeah, but that's why people didn't quite believe it, because the metrics can be fudged with, right? How often do they not include mortgage rate hikes? How often do they not include the price of beef, right? When they take into account all of the inflation data, all this economic data, right? It gets ignored constantly. And it's basically the same type of scenario where the FBI had to come out and adjust their numbers to show that, yes, in fact, crime actually did increase. And this recording of David Pakman from 1 day ago, he's had access to all of this information, but he's still sticking with the same old talking points, right? It's the perception, even the border, right? He even mentions the border, how it's just the people's perception that, yes, the border is being overflowed by millions of people. It's not really actually happening despite video evidence, okay? But that, of course, is his problem. And despite all of that, he's still willing to admit that Joe Biden was going to do worse than Kamala Harris, which is obviously true, right? His polling was in the toilet. Kamala Harris came in and gave a little bit of a rejuvenation to the Democrat Party, but fortunately it didn't last because she was a terrible candidate who couldn't answer questions, couldn't do interviews, and of course had all of the wrong policies on pretty much every single issue, okay? So this was not just perception from the public, this was reality kicking in spite of the media trying to spin everything, in spite of all of the polls showing Kamala Harris was way ahead, right? But even David Pakman, as I said, has to admit that, yeah, Joe Biden had even less of a chance than Kamala Harris did. So this is completely ridiculous that he would even bring this up. But let's go ahead and check in on the Young Turks.
Let me just be very clear and blunt. There is absolutely no indication, no evidence, nothing to indicate that Joe Biden would have beaten Donald Trump. On the contrary, there is a mountain of evidence indicating that he would have lost to Trump. In fact, some of the people close to Biden have since come out publicly to admit that their internal polling was even worse than the public polling that we all saw for ourselves. So how can someone be this delusional? I don't understand. And I'm going to show you some of that evidence in just a moment. But Cenk, why don't you jump in?
I could see how the right wing would think that Biden is the Wizard of Oz. Don't worry, Democratic leadership knows everything. We're the professionals. We're the ones who know what's right and wrong, and we play fourth dimensional chess. You open up the curtain, and you've got a guy in mental decline who's like, I could have won, when literally no one in the country thinks that. So yeah, the people in power are all the Wizard of Oz. They don't know anything. They live in utter delusion, and this story is an excellent example of that.
Well, I think what's also a common issue that you find with not just leaders in the United States, but world leaders, is once they surround themselves with yes men, and in this case, you know, this piece is not just about what Biden believed, it's what Biden and his aides believe. I mean, it's hard to imagine that people who don't have cognitive decline like Biden would delude themselves into thinking that he had a shot in beating Donald Trump in the election. But his aides allegedly are saying, yeah, he could have totally beat Trump. Like, he shouldn't have dropped out of the race. That is the regret. I mean, imagine at this point in the game, not confessing, not taking some ownership of the terrible decision to run for a second term, or the terrible decision to stay in the race for as long as Biden did. No, there's no humility here. There's no self-reflection. It's just doubling down on the exact thing that Biden did wrong. It's amazing. But I think it's because he has people surrounding him that were nodding their heads and saying, yeah, totally, you're doing great. You could have beaten Trump. His national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, who I can't wait to never have to hear from again, says the president has been operating on a time horizon measured in decades, while the political cycle is measured in 4 years. James Clyburn remembered telling Biden that he had to revitalize his campaign because he was too focused on substance and not focused enough on like the politics of winning. The new environment that we currently live in, style seems to carry the day more than substance. Your style does not lend itself well to the environment we're currently in. Or it could be that he was obviously deteriorating right before our eyes and the American people did not feel comfortable re-electing him to serve a second term.
So yeah, you know what's bad when even the left is turning on you and calling you out for not acknowledging the reality that Americans are living through, okay? And remember, all of these people, Anna Kasparian, Cenk Uygur, David Pakman, they were all swearing up and down that, yeah, trust these polls, Kamala Harris is winning. And now that that's been proven false, they're saying, oh, we knew it all along, right? The Democrats didn't have good messaging. They weren't making the right promises, right? The perception was all bad. When in fact, it was a complete rejection of the Democrat Party and every single thing they stand for. for. Not just the candidate Joe Biden, not just the candidate Kamala Harris. Their entire platform has been crushed to dust, hopefully for the foreseeable future. And at least they're willing to admit that, yeah, Joe Biden did not have any chance of winning. So him coming out now and saying, yeah, I totally would have won is completely ridiculous. So thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, and stay safe out there, people, because they're coming after you.